I am Joshua, 32 years old, and my parents cut me off for 4 years like I didn't exist. Before I tell you about the moment my father tried to financially ruin me in front of a room full of people and ended up leaving in the back of a police cruiser, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 45 minutes past 7. The kind of crisp, sharp autumn morning in the city where you can see your breath in the air and the sunlight hits the brick buildings at a low, golden angle. I was standing behind the massive oak counter of my shop, Riverside Coffee. My hands were wrapped around the cold metal of the portafilter, tamping down freshly ground espresso beans. The shop smelled incredible. A deep, rich mix of dark roast Colombian coffee, warm butter croissants, and the faint scent of cinnamon from the bakery rack. The low hum of the espresso machine and the soft, rhythmic jazz playing from the ceiling speakers created a perfect, peaceful rhythm. This was my sanctuary. I knew every scratch on the hardwood floor because I sanded those boards myself. I knew the slight squeak of the front door hinge. I knew the names of my morning regulars. Mr. Gray was sitting at his usual corner table by the window, adjusting his reading glasses as he folded the morning newspaper perfectly down the middle. A couple of college students were huddled over laptops near the back, and a line of 4 professionals in business suits stood patiently waiting to order. Everything was exactly how it was supposed to be. I had built this life from absolutely nothing. Then the heavy brass bell above the front glass door chimed. It was not a normal chime. Someone pushed the door open with a sudden, violent force, causing it to bang against the rubber doorstop. The cold morning air rushed inside, but that was not what made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the heavy, arrogant, unmistakable sound of leather dress shoes striking the hardwood floor. I did not even have to look up to know my piece was over. My chest tightened immediately, a hard knot forming right beneath my ribs. I wiped my hands slowly on the dark denim apron tied around my waist, took a deep breath to steady my racing heart, and lifted my head. Through the large front window of my shop, taking up 2 parking spaces directly across the street, sat my father's gleaming silver Porsche. It was parked illegally, half up on the curb, the hazard lights flashing as if the rules of the city simply did not apply to him. And there they were, standing right in the middle of my life. My father, Robert, walked in first. He was wearing a charcoal gray tailored suit that probably cost more than my first espresso machine. His broad shoulders were pulled back, his chest puffed out, and his jaw was set in that familiar, hard line he always used when he was preparing to crush a rival in a boardroom. Behind him was my mother. She was wearing a beige cashmere coat, her hair blown out perfectly, her lips painted a severe shade of red. She was scanning my coffee shop with a look of absolute disdain, turning up her nose at the exposed brick walls and the mismatched vintage chairs as if she had just stepped into a biohazard zone. Trailing slightly behind them, holding his latest smartphone up at chest level with the camera lens pointed directly at me, was my younger brother, Matthew. The golden boy. The one who never said no, the one who took the money, the cars, and the expectations without a single complaint. He had a smug, punchable smirk plastered across his face. He was recording. He wanted content. He wanted to capture the exact moment I broke down. They completely ignored the line of customers. They bypassed the 4 people waiting politely and marched straight to the pickup counter. My father placed both of his heavy hands flat on my wooden counter, leaning his weight forward, invading my space. "What a cute little place," my father announced. His voice was booming. It was not a greeting. It was a performance. He projected his voice so the college students in the back and Mr. Gray by the window would stop what they were doing and look. "We are so proud of you, Joshua." Proud. The word tasted like poison. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. But I kept my face entirely blank. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I just stood there, looking at the man who had not spoken a single word to me in 1,460 days. My mother stepped up beside him, resting her hand on his arm. She turned to the young woman standing at the front of the line, flashing a blinding, entirely fake smile. "Isn't it charming?" my mother said loudly. "Our son is so entrepreneurial. We always knew he had a little hobby in him. It keeps him busy. A hobby. A 60-hour-a-week business that paid my mortgage and employed 4 people was a hobby to her. I looked my father directly in the eyes. His eyes were cold, calculating, and completely empty of anything resembling paternal warmth. "Can I help you?" I asked. My voice was completely flat, completely devoid of emotion. My father's fake smile vanished in a fraction of a second. The performance for the crowd was over. The real business was beginning. He reached inside his expensive leather portfolio, pulled out a thick, legally bound document heavily stapled at the corner, and slammed it down onto my counter. The violent slap of the paper made the glass tip jar rattle. He leaned in closer. I could smell the sharp, expensive musk of his cologne. "You have had your fun playing independent, Joshua," he hissed. His voice was low now, a dangerous, vibrating growl meant only for my ears. "But playtime is over. Sign this. It is a partnership agreement. You are going to sign over 15% of Riverside Coffee LLC to this family. You can consider it a family tax for everything you cost us." I looked down at the document. The crisp white paper glared under the warm pendant lights of the shop. I could clearly read the bold, capitalized letters at the top indicating a transfer of equity. My full legal name was already printed perfectly on the signature line at the bottom. I did not touch it. I kept my hands firmly by my sides. "Why would I give you 15% of my business?" I asked calmly. Matthew scoffed loudly, shifting his phone to make sure he had a clear angle of my face. My mother rolled her eyes and sighed heavily, acting as if my stubbornness was a terrible burden she was forced to bear. "Because," my father whispered, his eyes narrowing into dark slits, "I can make one phone call. I did my research, Joshua. I know exactly who owns this building. I know your landlord. I know Wyatt. I play golf with men who could buy and sell him before breakfast. I call him right now, tonight, and I tell him you are running an unsafe, non-compliant operation. I tell him you have violated the terms of your commercial lease. You will be locked out of this building and out on the street by Friday morning. Sign the paper." He stood up straight, crossing his arms over his chest, looking down at me like I was an insect he was preparing to step on. He fully expected me to panic. He expected me to start begging, to start negotiating, to show fear. People like my father operate on the core belief that everyone has a breaking point, and that money and loud threats can bend the entire world to their will. I looked past him. I made eye contact with Mr. Gray, who had lowered his newspaper completely and was staring at my father with a look of absolute disgust. I looked at my barista, Chloe, who had frozen beside the cash register, her eyes wide. I turned my attention back to the man demanding my livelihood. I reached over, grabbed a clean paper napkin, and used the edge of it to slide his extortion contract back across the counter until it bumped against his knuckles. I refused to let my bare skin touch his paperwork. "No," I said. My father's jaw dropped slightly. The muscles in his thick neck strained, and a thick blue vein pulsed visibly on his temple. "Excuse me?" I said. "No," I repeated, louder this time. "And if you want to call Wyatt, go ahead. In fact, let's call him right now. But you are going to put it on speaker. I want everyone in this shop to hear exactly how you operate." My father hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his arrogant features. He did not expect me to call his bluff. He expected submission. But Matthew was still recording, the red light on his screen blinking steadily, and the customers were dead silent, watching the drama unfold. My father's massive ego simply would not allow him to back down in public. He pulled his sleek smartphone from his jacket pocket, his thumb jabbing aggressively at the screen. He scrolled to his contacts, found the number, hit dial, and pressed the speaker icon. He set the phone down right on top of his rejected contract. The dial tone echoed loudly in the quiet coffee shop. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. The tension in the room was so thick it felt hard to breathe. Then, a gruff, alert voice answered the line. "Yeah, Wyatt speaking." My father's posture instantly changed. He puffed his chest back out, plastering a fake, hearty tone onto his voice. "Wyatt, Robert Pierce here. Listen, we need to have a serious conversation about your tenant down on Alder Street. Riverside Coffee. I am Joshua's father, and I need to inform you about some severe lease violations and unapproved operations going on in your commercial unit right now." There was a heavy, dead pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background on Wyatt's end. Then Wyatt spoke, his voice completely unbothered, laced with an unmistakable edge of irritation. "Who told you I'd evict him?" Wyatt asked. My father blinked hard. His confident smile completely dissolved. "What? Wyatt, I am telling you he is running a non-compliant shop. As his father, I have a right to intervene and—" "I don't deal with fathers," Wyatt interrupted, his voice cutting through the speaker like a blade. "I deal with my tenant. I deal with Joshua. You are not protecting him, Robert. You are trying to steal from him. Do not ever call this number regarding my building again." The line went dead with a sharp click. The silence that followed was deafening. My father stood frozen, staring down at his phone, as if the piece of metal and glass had just personally betrayed him. My mother's mouth was hanging slightly open. Matthew lowered his camera just a fraction of an inch, the smugness completely wiped from his face. I looked at the man standing across the counter from me. As I stared at his shocked, humiliated face, the walls of the coffee shop seemed to fade away. My mind violently pulled me back in time. I was no longer 32 years old, standing in a successful business. I was 28 again. I was standing in the freezing snow, feeling the absolute, crushing weight of what it meant to be discarded by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. 4 years ago, the night they cut me off felt exactly like a funeral. It was a funeral for a family that was still breathing, a mourning period for parents who chose control over their own flesh and blood. At 28, I was miserable. I was working a high-pressure corporate job at a massive logistics firm. It was a job my father had aggressively maneuvered me into using his golf course connections. I had a massive salary that looked great on paper. I had a corner office with a view of the city skyline. I had a guaranteed promotion to regional director dangling right over my head, promised to me by the end of the fourth quarter. But I was dying inside. I was working 80 to 90 hours a week. I was missing every weekend, every holiday. I was making incredibly rich men even richer by exploiting loopholes and destroying smaller supply chain businesses. Every morning I woke up, looked in the mirror, and hated the man looking back at me. The stress was physically destroying my body. I was losing weight, my hair was thinning, and I could not sleep for more than 3 hours a night without waking up in a cold sweat. One evening in late November, I drove to my parents' massive, gated estate in the suburbs. We were having a formal family dinner in their dining room. The table was set with heavy silver cutlery and crystal glasses. My mother was serving a roast. Matthew was talking loudly about a new sports car he wanted. I waited until the plates were cleared, and then I told them the truth. I looked my father in the eye and told him I was resigning the next morning. I told him I could not do it anymore. I told him I wanted to take whatever savings I had, secure a small commercial loan, and open a coffee shop. It was a dream I had held onto since college, a dream I had buried to make him happy. The reaction was not disappointment. It was an explosion of pure, unadulterated rage. My father grabbed his heavy crystal whiskey glass and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the stone fireplace, shattering into 100 glittering pieces, raining glass down onto the expensive Persian rug. He stood up, knocking his heavy dining chair backward. His face turned a deep, terrifying shade of purple. He towered over the table, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. He told me I was an ungrateful, pathetic embarrassment. He screamed that I was throwing away a golden ticket, that I was humiliating him in front of his peers. "You want to pour coffee for minimum wage?" he roared, spit flying from his lips. "You want to throw away the salary and the promotion I secured for you? Fine. But if you walk away from that firm, you walk away from this family. I will call my lawyer tomorrow morning. I will cut you out of the inheritance." I will erase your name from the family trust completely. He was not bluffing. My parents had always used money as a weapon. They had drained my entire college fund years ago to leverage one of their own risky real estate deals, promising they would pay it back with interest. They never did. I took out massive student loans to finish my degree, loans I was still paying off while earning that corporate salary. My mother sat perfectly still at the head of the table. She elegantly dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin, picked up her glass of red wine, and took a slow sip. She did not defend me. She did not try to calm my father down. She looked at me with eyes so cold it made my chest ache. "You are making a terrible, childish mistake, Joshua," she said, her voice eerily calm compared to my father's screaming. "You do not know how the real world works. You will fail. And when you do, do not expect us to save you. Do not come crying to our door." Matthew was sitting right next to her. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, swirling his water glass, a tiny, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. With me out of the picture, he was the sole heir. He was the only one left to inherit the estate. "Get out," my father demanded, pointing toward the heavy oak front door. "If you walk out that door tonight, you have no family. You are dead to us." I stood up. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the heavy key fob for the company car he had leased for me, and dropped it onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud. I turned around and walked out. I walked out into the freezing November night. I did not have a heavy winter coat. I did not have a safety net. I walked 3 miles in the dark down the winding suburban roads toward the train station, shivering violently, feeling the sharp, agonizing sting of rejection cutting deep into my chest. They cut me off completely. They did not call the next day. There were no phone calls on Thanksgiving. No messages on Christmas checking to see if I was warm or if I had food. Total, deafening, intentional silence. The days and weeks that followed were the darkest period of my entire life. I was completely alone in a massive city. I had some corporate savings, but breaking my apartment lease to find something cheaper drained almost all of it. I did not have enough capital to survive and start a business simultaneously. I needed a bridge loan. I needed a friend. I swallowed my pride and called Elijah. Elijah and I grew up together. We went to the same elite private schools. We played on the same tennis teams. His family went on vacations with my family. He was the closest thing I had to a brother besides Matthew. I drove my newly purchased, beat-up used sedan to his luxury apartment complex downtown. I just needed to sleep on his couch for 1 week while I finalized a cheap apartment rental and figured out my next move. I knocked on his door. When Elijah opened it, he only opened it a crack, leaving the security chain attached. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He stood in the narrow doorway, blocking my path, staring down at his expensive sneakers. "I can't let you in, man," Elijah muttered. His voice was incredibly tense. "What are you talking about?" I asked, completely confused. "Eli, it is freezing out here. I just need a couple of days. I'll stay out of your way." Elijah shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "Your dad called me this morning. He called my dad, too. He said if I help you, if anyone in our circle helps you, he pulls his firm's investment portfolio out of my tech startup. It would bankrupt me, Josh. I can't risk it. I'm so sorry, man. You should just go home and apologize to him. It's not worth it." He gently closed the door in my face. The heavy lock clicked into place. I stood in that pristine, carpeted hallway, staring at the brass numbers on his door. My chest felt hollow. The air was sucked completely out of my lungs. I realized right then the true, terrifying reach of my father's power. He was not just locking me out of his house. He was actively, aggressively trying to starve me out of the city. He was cutting off my social lifelines. He wanted me desperate. He wanted me broken. He wanted me crawling back on my hands and knees, begging for my miserable corporate salary, begging for his approval, begging for the miserable life he had designed for me. I walked back down to my cold car. I gripped my steering wheel so hard my hands shook, tears of pure, hot frustration burning my eyes. Sitting in the dark, I made a promise to myself. I would never crawl. I would never ask them for a single dime. I would rather starve on the street than give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I lived out of the back seat of my car for a month and a half. I bought a cheap membership to a 24-hour gym just so I could take hot showers and brush my teeth before sunrise. I worked 3 different minimum wage jobs. I worked retail during the day, waited tables at a diner at night, and did freelance data entry on my laptop in the back of my car until my eyes blurred. I saved every single penny. I ate ramen noodles and day-old bread. Eventually, I scraped together enough cash to secure a deposit for a commercial lease. I found a rundown, abandoned, disgusting corner unit on Alder Street. The previous tenant had left it in ruins. The floorboards were rotting, the windows were cracked, and the plumbing was ancient. But it was mine. I signed the lease. I moved a sleeping bag into the back storage closet and spent every waking hour in that building. I could not afford contractors. I taught myself basic commercial plumbing by watching hundreds of hours of videos online. I rented a heavy industrial sander and sanded the rotting hardwood floors for 3 days straight until my hands were covered in bloody blisters. I bought a broken, used commercial espresso machine from a bankrupt diner and refurbished it myself, ordering replacement parts one by one. It was an agonizing, brutally hard process, and it was made infinitely harder when the original owner of the building, a sleazy, fast-talking real estate flipper named Julian, decided to try and screw me over. Right as I finished the final renovations, Julian got a massive cash offer from a corporate developer who wanted to bulldoze the entire block. Julian sent me an eviction notice, claiming a fabricated breach of contract, trying to break my lease so he could sell the building empty. I refused to let another man take my life away. I fought him tooth and nail. I hired a cheap, incredibly aggressive young lawyer. We reviewed the original lease contract word by word and found a forgotten legal loophole that gave me the right of first refusal on any sale of the property. I took my entire business plan to a high-risk commercial lender, secured a terrifyingly high-interest mortgage, and bought the damn building out from under Julian. Every time I wanted to quit during those 4 years, every time my back ached so badly I could barely stand, every time my bank account hit zero and I had to eat plain rice for a week, I thought about my father's red, screaming face. I thought about my mother's cold, dead eyes. Their rejection became my fuel. Their cruelty became the foundation I built my entire life upon. For years of grinding, sweating, and bleeding built Riverside Coffee. It was my heart. It was my home. And now, snapping back to the present moment, looking at my father standing arrogantly at my beautiful wooden counter, demanding 15% of the life I built from the ashes he intentionally left me in, I felt a cold, hard, unbreakable resolve settle deep into my bones. The shock of Wyatt hanging up on him wore off in a matter of seconds. My father's face flushed a deep, angry, mottled red. He shoved his phone violently back into his suit jacket pocket, gripping the edge of the wooden counter so hard his knuckles turned completely white. When bullies lose their primary weapon, they do not retreat. They do not apologize. They just reach for a heavier, dirtier club. You think that matters? My father spat, leaning over the expensive espresso machine I had rebuilt with my own hands. His voice dropped to a menacing, guttural growl. You think a landlord liking you keeps you safe in the real world? You own a restaurant, Joshua. Do you have any idea how fragile this industry is? I kept my hands resting easily, loosely on the counter. I did not break eye contact. Enlighten me. I have friends on the city council, he threatened, jabbing a finger toward my chest. I know the chief health inspector for this specific commercial district. I know the fire marshal. I can have a full, invasive audit triggered on your business taxes before the end of the week. I will have them inspect every single electrical wire, every water pipe, and every crumpled receipt in this miserable little shack. I will bury you in legal fees, code violations, and municipal fines until you are begging me to take this place off your hands just to escape bankruptcy. He was describing institutional harassment like he was ordering a cup of coffee. He was entirely serious. This was exactly how my father operated. If he could not control you financially, he destroyed you legally. He weaponized the system against anyone who dared to stand in his way. Matthew stepped closer to the counter, his phone still angled directly at my face. "Just sign the paper, Josh," he said, trying to sound tough, trying to sound like his father. "Dad is giving you an easy way out. Don't be an idiot. You can't fight him." My blood boiled beneath the surface of my skin, but my face remained completely still. I looked at my brother, the kid who had his entire college fund handed to him, who drove a car paid for by the trust fund, trying to act like a mob enforcer in my coffee shop. My mother, possessing the terrifying emotional radar of a true manipulator, realized the aggressive intimidation tactic was making the customers deeply uncomfortable. A few people near the back had hastily packed up their laptops and practically ran out the door. Others, like Mr. Gray, were watching closely, their faces tight with concern. She instantly shifted gears, deciding to pivot and play her absolute favorite role: the heartbroken, long-suffering, caring mother. She turned away from me and looked directly at Mr. Gray, who was standing solidly by the pickup counter holding his newspaper like a shield. "I am so sorry you have to see this unpleasantness," she said to Mr. Gray, placing a trembling hand over her heart. Her voice was shaking perfectly. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. "Our son has always been mentally unstable. He cuts people out of his life for no reason. He makes incredibly rash, impulsive decisions. We are just trying to bring him back into the safety of the family. We want to help manage his assets so he doesn't completely ruin his own life." Mr. Gray looked at her. He looked at her expensive coat, her perfect hair, and her fake, teary eyes. Then he looked at me. Mr. Gray knew that I arrived at the shop at 4:30 a.m. every single day to bake the pastries. He knew that I remembered he took a splash of oat milk and no sugar. He knew the names of his grandchildren because I asked about them every Tuesday. Mr. Gray did not buy her toxic act for a single second. He just took a slow, deliberate sip of his hot coffee, tightened his grip on his newspaper, and stepped back, crossing his arms over his chest like a silent sentry. My mother turned back to me, her eyes immediately narrowing into vicious slits. The sweet, caring mother act melted away the instant she realized the audience wasn't buying it. "You are embarrassing us, Joshua," she hissed. "You always do. We gave you everything. We gave you a perfect life, and you repay us by serving coffee to strangers like a peasant. Sign the document. Give your father the equity he is asking for, and we will make sure you don't go bankrupt and end up sleeping on the streets again." "You want 15%? I stated flatly, ignoring her insults completely. "To start," my father corrected, aggressively adjusting his silk tie. "We will handle the back-end corporate finances. We will streamline your operations. You just stay behind the counter and make the coffee." I looked at the three of them, my family, the people whose blood ran in my veins, the people who were supposed to protect me, guide me, and love me were standing in my place of business, threatening my livelihood, trying to legally extort me in broad daylight. "Chloe," I said, not taking my eyes off my father's face for a second. Chloe stepped up right beside me. She was a tough, 22-year-old college student who took exactly zero garbage from anyone. "Yes, boss. Can you watch the register and keep an eye on the floor for exactly 2 minutes?" "Got it," she said firmly. She crossed her arms and glared openly at my father. I turned my back on my family. I did not rush. I walked at a normal, measured pace down the length of the counter to the small, reinforced office door at the back of the shop. I keyed in the 6-digit security code, stepped inside the cramped office, and knelt down on the concrete floor. I spun the dial on the heavy steel safe bolted into the foundation. I didn't need to search through the files. I knew exactly where the folder was. It was a thick, heavy, blue manila folder. I had spent thousands of dollars on my lawyer to ensure that every single piece of paper inside this folder was absolutely bulletproof. It was the armor I had spent 4 years forging. I grabbed the heavy blue folder, locked the safe securely, and walked back out to the front counter. I dropped the folder directly on top of my father's ridiculous extortion contract. The heavy slap of the paper echoed in the tense silence of the shop. You want to talk about assets, compliance, and legalities, I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room like a freshly sharpened knife. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about exactly what you are trying to steal today. My father looked down at the blue folder. He frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together. What is this garbage? Open it, I challenged him. I stepped back and gestured toward the folder with an open hand. Read it. You are a businessman. Read the paperwork. My father sneered, but his inherent arrogance and curiosity got the better of him. He flipped open the heavy cover of the blue folder. The first document on top was a standard city commercial operating license. He glossed over it, barely reading the print. The second document was a past, pristine fire inspection report from exactly 3 months ago. He scoffed loudly, looking up at me as if I was wasting his incredibly valuable time. You think basic operational permits impress me, Joshua? He demanded, his voice dripping with condescension. Every hot dog stand on the corner has these. Keep reading, I instructed, my voice unwavering. He flipped to the third document. It was a legal deed summary from the county recorder's office. The print was crisp, bearing the official, raised blue stamp of the state government. I watched his eyes as they hit the page. I watched his brain switch from angry father mode to corporate executive mode. I watched his eyes scan the complex legal jargon. I watched his gaze trace down the page to the specific section clearly marked, property owner. The silence in the room stretched out. Felt like time had stopped entirely. The soft jazz music overhead suddenly felt deafeningly loud. My father's thick brow furrowed. He read the line again. He blinked hard, squinting, as if the bold, black words on the page might magically rearrange themselves if he focused enough. What is this? He asked. His loud, booming, authoritative voice had suddenly lost all of its volume. It sounded thin, weak. My mother leaned over his broad shoulder, squinting at the dense legal paper. What does it say, Robert? What is he showing you? I placed both of my hands flat on the wooden counter and leaned my upper body forward, intentionally closing the physical distance between us. I wanted to see the exact moment his reality shattered. It says, I spoke clearly, slowly, making sure every single syllable landed perfectly, that Wyatt is not just the landlord. Wyatt is my property manager. And that building entity, the LLC you just threatened to call and complain to? I paused. I let the absolute gravity of the situation hang in the air for 3 agonizing seconds. That entity is mine. My mother gasped sharply, taking a physical, stumbling step backward, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's face completely drained of color. The angry red flush vanished, leaving him looking pale, sick, and incredibly old. You own the building? I am the sole managing member of the holding LLC that owns this entire commercial block, I clarified, making sure the legal distinction was perfectly clear to his corporate brain. When the old owner, Julian, tried to sell it out from under me, I exercised my legal right of first refusal. I bought the building. Wyatt handles the daily tenant issues, the plumbing complaints, and the rent collection because I prefer to run my coffee shop in peace. So, when you just called Wyatt on speakerphone in front of all these witnesses and threatened to get the tenant evicted, I let a small, cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. You were threatening to get me evicted from my own property. You were threatening to report me to myself. The look of absolute, crushing defeat and profound humiliation that washed over my father's face was something I will remember with crystal clarity until the day I die. He had walked into my shop firmly believing I was a desperate, struggling, minimum-wage barista barely making rent every month. He believed he held all the power, all the cards, and all the leverage. He believed his massive wealth and his loud voice gave him the divine right to crush me into the dirt. Instead, he was standing inside a commercial building I owned, making empty, pathetic threats against a landlord who worked directly on my payroll. You're lying, my mother hissed. Her voice was trembling uncontrollably as she pointed a manicured finger at the stamped document. That is a fake document. There is absolutely no way you secured the capital for a multimillion-dollar commercial building. You were completely broke. You had nothing in your bank account when you left us. I had nothing, I agreed easily, maintaining eye contact with my father, refusing to look at her. But I worked. I saved. I built. I didn't take vacations. I didn't buy sports cars. And most importantly, I didn't have you constantly draining my energy, manipulating my choices, and destroying my confidence. My father abruptly slammed the blue folder shut. The sound was loud and desperate. He was completely cornered, and his massive ego was severely bruised in front of an audience of strangers. But Robert Pierce does not apologize. When he is proven wrong, when he is publicly humiliated, he does not reflect. He just turns vicious. Fine, my father snarled. His eyes were burning with a look of pure, unadulterated malice. The mask of the caring, concerned father was completely gone. You own the bricks. Congratulations, Joshua. You bought a crumbling brick box. But you still run an operating company inside of it. You still have Riverside Coffee LLC registered with the state. He tapped his fingernail aggressively against his own extortion contract still sitting on the counter. You are going to sign this paper, Joshua, or I promise you, I will bury this coffee business in so much red tape, so many frivolous lawsuits, and so many municipal complaints that you won't be able to breathe. I will bleed your operating budget dry. While he was yelling, throwing his desperate legal threats into the air, my eyes darted slightly to the right. I looked at Matthew. Matthew had completely lowered his phone. He wasn't recording the confrontation anymore. He was standing slightly behind my mother, his head bowed down, staring intently at his glowing screen. His thumbs were flying across the digital keyboard at lightning speed. He looked incredibly tense. He was chewing nervously on his bottom lip, a telltale sign of anxiety he had had since we were kids. I casually shifted my gaze upward toward the ceiling corner near the front window. Our commercial internet router was mounted up there. The small green LED light indicating guest Wi-Fi traffic was blinking frantically. It was strobing, indicating a massive upload of encrypted data. My brain started connecting the dots at warp speed. Why would Matthew, the kid who lived for social media drama, stop recording the biggest confrontation of our lives? The only thing Matthew loved more than family chaos was posting it online for validation. Unless he was doing something else. Something highly specific. Something my father had instructed him to do as a digital backup plan in case the physical intimidation failed. A cold, sharp chill ran rapidly down my spine, immediately followed by a massive spike of adrenaline. I remembered my father's exact words from just 5 minutes ago. We will handle the back-end corporate finances. They weren't just here to yell at me. They weren't just here to threaten me with building inspectors. They had a coordinated plan already in motion. I reached deep into my heavy apron pocket and pulled out my own smartphone. I bypassed my standard text messages and immediately opened my secure, encrypted email application tied to the LLC registry. I swiped down to refresh the inbox. Nothing. The screen was empty. I waited 2 seconds and swiped down to refresh it again. And then, a bright, glaring red notification banner popped up at the very top of my screen. The email subject line read, in bold, terrifying letters, urgent notification. Change of control request initiated, Riverside Coffee LLC. My heart slammed against my ribs like a sledgehammer, but my hands remained perfectly, unnaturally steady. I tapped the email to open the full report. It was an automated, high-priority security alert from the state's Corporate Compliance Registry Office. Someone was actively, in real time, trying to legally hijack my business entity. They were attempting to file a fraudulent change of registered agent and managing member form, attempting to digitally insert their own names onto my corporate filings, effectively locking me out of my own company's bank accounts and tax profiles. I read the specific details generated by the state's security system. Filing name submitted, Robert Pierce. IP address origin location, Riverside Coffee Guest Wi-Fi Network. I looked up from my screen. I looked straight at Matthew. He had his head down, sweating profusely now, still tapping frantically on his screen. He was trying to bypass the secondary two-factor authentication prompt that was currently sending secure alerts directly to my phone in my hand. My father had purposely distracted me with the loud, aggressive argument, the fake real estate threats, and the paper contract, all while Matthew stood right in the middle of my shop, using my own guest internet connection to commit a severe federal crime: wire fraud and corporate identity theft. "Matthew," I said. My voice was no longer calm. It was not flat. It was sharp, loud, and carried an absolute command that silenced the entire room instantly. Matthew jumped violently, nearly dropping his expensive phone onto the floor. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with guilt. "What exactly are you doing on your phone?" I asked, stepping out from behind the register. My mother quickly stepped sideways, trying to physically block my view of her golden child. "He is texting his friends. Leave your brother alone, Joshua. You are being paranoid." I didn't even look at her. I walked aggressively around the edge of the long wooden counter. My father tried to step into my path, throwing his arm out to block me, but I shoved past him with a physical force that surprised us both, knocking his arm away. I stood directly in front of Matthew, invading his personal space. "Show me the screen, Matt," I demanded, holding my hand out. Matthew swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He shoved the phone deep into his jacket pocket and took a step back. "Back off, Josh. I'm not doing anything. You're crazy." I didn't try to grab his phone. I didn't need to. I held up my own phone, turning the screen around so the brightness illuminated the space between us. I made sure my father, my mother, and Matthew could clearly read the bright red security alert from the state registry. "You thought I was stupid?" I asked, my voice echoing off the brick walls. Every single customer in the shop was dead silent, watching intently. "You really thought I wouldn't have advanced fraud alerts placed on my own LLC? You are submitting a change of control form to the Secretary of State. And you are doing it on my guest Wi-Fi network." My father's face, which had just regained some color, went completely sickly pale. The arrogant, untouchable smirk completely dissolved into a mask of pure terror. He was a businessman. He knew exactly what this meant. He knew the devastating legal implications of an undeniable, time-stamped digital footprint. It's a mistake," my father stammered. His loud, booming voice was suddenly weak, high-pitched, and trembling. "It's a glitch in the state system, a computer error. The system logged your exact legal name, Robert," I said, stepping closer to him, forcing him to look at the screen. "It logged your IP address. It logged the exact minute you hit submit. You walked into my property. You tried to verbally extort me for 15% of my business. And when I refused to sign your paper, you tried to digitally steal my company right in front of me." My mother grabbed my father's arm. Her manicured fingers dug into his expensive suit jacket. Her eyes were wide, filled with genuine, unadulterated panic. "Robert, let's leave. Right now. We need to go to the car." "No one is leaving," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I turned my back to them and looked across the space at Chloe. She was already watching me, her posture rigid, her hand hovering just beneath the lip of the cash register. We had installed a high-end, silent security system after a terrifying break-in attempt a year ago. It featured a silent panic alarm button under the counter that immediately, without a sound, dispatched the local police and permanently flagged the time codes on all 4 high-definition surveillance cameras inside the shop. "Chloe," I said, giving her a single, sharp nod. Chloe didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. She slammed her hand upward, pressing the hidden button. I didn't hear a sound, but I knew the encrypted signal was sent directly to the local precinct. "What did you just do?" my father demanded, stepping aggressively toward the counter. "Did you call the cops? Over a family dispute? Are you out of your mind?" "This isn't a family dispute, Robert," I told him, planting my feet solidly, refusing to give up an inch of ground in my own shop. This is felony wire fraud. This is attempted extortion. And you just committed both crimes right underneath a 360-degree, high-definition security camera with active audio recording. I raised my arm and pointed directly at the black dome mounted on the ceiling, right above the spot where Matthew was standing. My father slowly looked up at the camera. For the first time in my entire 32 years of life, I saw genuine, raw, unadulterated fear in his eyes. The terrifying man who had controlled every aspect of my life, who had screamed at me, who had thrown me into the freezing snow without a second thought, was suddenly realizing he was completely trapped in a cage of his own making. "Joshua, please," my mother begged. Her voice was shrill, desperate, completely stripped of its fake elegance and country club superiority. "He is your father. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. Cancel the alarm. Tell them it was a mistake. We will leave and we will never, ever come back. Please, Joshua. You wanted to teach me a lesson about how the real world works," I replied. My voice as cold and hard as stone. "Welcome to the real world." Matthew was shaking visibly now. He pulled his phone out of his pocket with trembling hands and frantically started hitting the back button, swiping furiously, trying to delete the web browser pages, trying to erase the digital evidence of what he had just done. "It doesn't matter, Matt," I told him, watching his pathetic panic. "The state server already captured the ping. They have the packet data. It's done." We stood there in a tense, suffocating silence for exactly 4 minutes. Nobody spoke. My father stared at the floor, breathing heavily. My mother quietly sobbed into her hands. Matthew kept trying to restart his phone. The soft jazz music continued to play overhead, creating a bizarre soundtrack to the destruction of my family. Mr. Gray watched over the top of his newspaper, completely motionless. Then, the heavy front door swung open. The man who walked in was not a uniformed police officer. He was wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored gray suit. He was carrying a slim leather briefcase, and he wore a heavy, official ID lanyard around his neck. He had sharp, analytical eyes that immediately swept the room, assessing the tension, the crying woman, and the angry men instantly. He walked with purpose, straight past the line of staring customers, and stopped directly in front of me. "Are you Joshua Pierce, managing member and registered agent of Riverside Coffee LLC?" he asked, his voice crisp and professional. "I am," I said. The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy metal badge mounted on leather. "My name is Nathan. I am a senior investigator with the State Corporate Compliance and Fraud Office. Our automated security system flagged a high-priority emergency fraud alert originating from this exact address. Specifically, we detected a forceful, unauthorized attempt to alter corporate registration data and transfer executive control from an unverified IP address." My mother let out a small, terrified gasp, clutching her designer purse to her chest. My father looked like he was going to be physically sick. The color completely drained from his face again. "I received the security alert on my end as well," I told Nathan, showing him the red banner still glowing on my phone screen. "The filing attempt was completely unauthorized. I did not initiate it." Nathan nodded curtly. He set his briefcase on the counter, snapped it open, and pulled out a digital tablet. He looked up, his cold gaze sweeping over the 3 people standing near the counter. "And which one of you is Robert Pierce?" Nathan asked. My father swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet shop. He nervously straightened his silk tie, desperately trying to muster up some of his usual corporate authority and boardroom bravado. "I am," my father said, his voice shaky. "I am his father. Look, officer, this is a massive misunderstanding. A simple clerical error. I am a silent investor in his company, and I was simply updating our internal administrative files on the state website. There is no fraud happening here." "That is an absolute lie," I stated immediately, my voice ringing out clear and loud. "He holds 0 equity in this LLC. We have no partnership contract. He invested nothing. He was actively attempting to verbally extort me for 15% of my business mere moments before the digital filing was initiated by his son on my guest network. Nathan didn't even blink at my father's excuse. He just tapped his stylus against his tablet screen. Sir, you understand that submitting false corporate documents to the state registry is a Class C felony, correct? It carries severe criminal penalties, including mandatory state prison time. Before my father could formulate another desperate lie, the heavy glass door of the shop opened again. This time, the bells chimed over the sound of heavy, authoritative boots hitting the hardwood floor. Two fully uniformed city police officers stepped into the shop. Officer Carter, a tall, imposing man with a stern face and a shaved head, and his younger partner, Officer Luke. Through the front window, cutting through the morning sunlight, I could see the bright red and blue lights of their cruiser reflecting wildly off the hood of my father's precious, illegally parked silver Porsche. We got a silent panic alarm triggered from this location, Officer Carter said, his hand resting casually but purposefully on his heavy-duty belt. He scanned the room, his eyes lingering on the crying woman and the pale men, before looking directly at me. Are you the owner? Is everyone in here safe? I am the owner, I said firmly. I am safe. But these three individuals walked into my business and attempted to verbally extort me for a percentage of my company. When I refused their demands, they used my Wi-Fi network to attempt a fraudulent, illegal takeover of my LLC registry with the state. The state compliance investigator is standing right here, confirming the digital trail. Officer Carter looked at Nathan. Nathan gave a single, curt nod and turned his tablet screen to show the police officer the flagged IP address and the timestamped state logs. Officer Carter's jaw tightened. He looked directly at my father. Sir, Carter said, his voice deep and commanding. Step away from the counter immediately. Keep your hands out of your pockets and where I can see them. This is absurd, my father shouted, finally losing the last shred of his temper. Fear turned back into explosive anger. I am a respected businessman. I own a massive real estate portfolio in this city. You cannot treat me like a common street criminal. I know the chief of police. This is a private family matter. Officer Luke stepped forward, closing the distance quickly. Sir, lower your voice and step back right now, or I will put you in handcuffs and drag you out of here. Do not test me. My father froze. He looked at the two armed officers. He looked at the stone-faced state investigator. Then he looked at me. There was no way out. The walls had completely closed in. His massive bank account couldn't buy him out of this. His loud, booming voice couldn't intimidate the police. He slowly stepped backward, raising his shaking hands slightly in the air. Do you want to press formal charges today? Officer Carter asked me, pulling out a small notepad. I want the digital fraud attempt investigated fully by the state office, I said, looking at Nathan, who nodded in agreement, already typing up his preliminary report. And regarding my physical property, I want them formally trespassed. All three of them. I want it on the official police record that if they ever step foot in my coffee shop or anywhere near this commercial building, they will be arrested immediately without warning. My mother started wailing. Real ugly, desperate tears this time. It was a pathetic sight. Joshua, please. We are your family. We gave you life. You can't ban us from your life. Think about what our friends will say. Think about the scandal. They will say I protected myself from criminals, I replied coldly. Officer Luke pulled out his pen. He demanded my parents' driver's licenses and Matthew's ID. He wrote down their exact names, addresses, and dates of birth, formally issuing the trespass warning in the system. Listen to me very carefully, Officer Luke told my father, handing the IDs back. You are now legally, permanently banned from these premises. If you return, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. There will be no warnings. Do you understand? My father didn't speak. He just glared at the floorboards, his jaw tight, his chest heaving. I asked if you understand, Luke repeated, his voice much louder, echoing in the quiet shop. I understand, My father whispered. Good. Now turn around and get out, Carter ordered, pointing toward the door. My parents turned around. Matthew kept his head down, completely humiliated, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. They walked slowly toward the door, doing the walk of shame past the line of my loyal customers who had watched their entire meltdown. Just as my father pushed the heavy glass door open to leave, Officer Carter's shoulder radio crackled loudly with static. Dispatch was running my father's name and date of birth through the criminal database. What the dispatcher said next made everyone in the room stop dead in their tracks, and changed the course of my life forever. The heavy front door was halfway open. The cold autumn air was rushing into the coffee shop. My father had his hand on the brass handle, his shoulders slumped in defeat, ready to walk out and escape the absolute humiliation he had just brought upon himself. But then, Officer Carter's shoulder radio crackled loudly. The static cut through the dead silence of the room. The dispatcher's voice was sharp, professional, and echoed off the brick walls of Riverside Coffee. Unit 27, be advised. The name Robert Pierce returns with an active investigative flag from the State Financial Crimes Division. Suspect is listed as a person of interest in an ongoing corporate extortion and wire fraud case. Hold subject and contact Detective Miller immediately. No one moved. The air in the room grew incredibly heavy. I watched my father freeze. His hand was still gripping the door handle, but his knuckles were completely white. Officer Carter immediately dropped his notepad. His hand moved instinctively to his duty belt. Officer Luke stepped sideways, physically blocking the exit, placing himself between my father and the open door. Sir, Officer Carter said, his voice completely devoid of any polite customer service tone. It was the voice of a man who was now dealing with a recognized criminal. Step away from the door. Put your hands behind your back. My father turned around slowly. His face was a mask of pure, unfiltered terror. The arrogant, wealthy corporate executive who had walked into my shop demanding 15% of my life was completely gone. He looked small. He looked pathetic. This is a mistake, my father stammered, his voice cracking. I have an impeccable record. I am a pillar of this community. You cannot arrest me. I demand to speak to my lawyer. I want my lawyer right now. You will have plenty of time to call your lawyer from the precinct, Officer Carter replied smoothly, stepping forward and grabbing my father's wrists. The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It sounded like absolute justice. My mother let out a blood-curdling scream. She dropped her designer purse onto the hardwood floor and grabbed Officer Luke's arm. You can't do this. Do you know who we are? We have a massive inheritance. We have trust funds. We can destroy your careers. Take those off him. Ma'am, step back right now or you will be placed under arrest for interfering with a police investigation, Officer Luke commanded, easily breaking her grip. My mother stumbled backward, her face smeared with mascara and tears. She looked wildly around the room, desperately searching for someone, anyone, to help her. She looked at the college students. She looked at Mr. Gray. Finally, her frantic eyes landed on me. Joshua, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. Stop them. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. Tell them you forgive him. He is your father. If they take him, the scandal will ruin us. It will ruin the family. I stood behind my wooden counter, my hands resting calmly on the polished surface. I looked at the woman who had watched my father throw me out into the freezing snow 4 years ago. I looked at the woman who had happily spent my college fund on her own luxury vacations and told me to figure it out myself. The family was ruined a long time ago, I said, my voice steady and cold. You are just finally getting the bill. I turned my attention to Nathan, the state corporate compliance investigator, who was quietly typing on his tablet, documenting every single second of the interaction. What did the dispatcher mean? I asked him directly. What active investigation? Nathan looked up, adjusting his glasses. He looked at my handcuffed father, then back to me. I cannot discuss the intimate details of an ongoing state investigation with a civilian, Mr. Pierce. However, I can tell you that the exact digital footprint we caught today, using a public guest Wi-Fi network to aggressively hijack a commercial LLC registry after a verbal intimidation attempt, matches a specific modus operandi. We have another small business owner, a woman who runs a boutique across town, who filed a very similar report 3 months ago. Your father attempted to force her into a hostile takeover. She refused, and hours later, someone tried to digitally steal her company. We just needed to catch him in the act to connect the IP address to his physical presence. Thanks to your security cameras and your immediate silent alarm, we have him dead to rights. A cold wave of realization washed over me. My father was not just a domestic abuser. He was not just a toxic parent who wanted to control his son. He was a serial corporate predator. He had built a system out of finding vulnerable small business owners, intimidating them with his wealth, and stealing their hard-earned equity through digital backdoors and legal threats. He thought he could do the exact same thing to me because I was his son. He thought my lifelong fear of him would make me the easiest target of all. He was incredibly wrong. Matthew, Officer Carter barked, turning his attention to my younger brother. Matthew was plastered against the front window, trying to make himself invisible. Hand over the cell phone, right now. It is being seized as digital evidence in a federal wire fraud investigation. Matthew whimpered. The golden boy, the one who had never faced a single consequence in his entire pampered life, began to hyperventilate. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped the phone as he handed it to the officer. I didn't want to do it, Matthew cried out, immediately throwing our father under the bus without a second thought. He made me do it. He told me to log into the state portal. He gave me the passwords. I was just following his orders. Please, I don't want to go to jail. I have a salary. I have a life. Shut up, Matthew. My father roared from his handcuffs, his face turning purple again. Do not say another word without a lawyer. You have the right to remain silent, Officer Carter began, reciting the Miranda rights in a calm, practiced voice as he marched my father toward the front door. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. They walked him out the door. The bells chimed a cheerful, bright sound that felt incredibly ironic. I watched through the large front window as they pushed my father into the back of the police cruiser, pressing his head down to clear the doorframe. My mother ran out after them, sobbing hysterically, completely ignoring her illegally parked Porsche. Matthew trailed behind her, clutching his chest, looking like he was about to pass out on the sidewalk. The cruiser pulled away, the red and blue lights flashing against the brick buildings of Alder Street. A tow truck arrived exactly 12 minutes later and dragged my father's gleaming silver Porsche away for being parked in a commercial loading zone. Inside the coffee shop, the heavy, suffocating tension finally broke. Mr. Gray, who had stood completely silent throughout the entire 20-minute ordeal, slowly folded his newspaper. He walked up to the counter, reached into his wallet, and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. He dropped it directly into Chloe's tip jar. Your espresso, Mr. Gray said, looking me directly in the eye, is the best in the city, Joshua. I will see you tomorrow morning. See you tomorrow, Mr. Gray, I replied, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. The next few weeks were a massive, chaotic whirlwind of legal meetings, police statements, and aggressive boundary setting. I did not sit back and wait for the dust to settle. I went on the absolute offensive. I took the revenue from Riverside Coffee and hired the most ruthless, heavily recommended commercial litigation lawyer in the city. My lawyer filed for an immediate permanent restraining order against Robert, my mother, and Matthew. Because we had the high-definition security footage showing the physical intimidation, the clear audio of the extortion threat, and the undeniable digital logs of the Wi-Fi network fraud, the judge granted the order without a moment of hesitation. They were legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my coffee shop, my commercial building, or my personal residence. If they even tried to send a text message through a third party, they would be held in contempt of court. But the restraining order was just the beginning of the nightmare for the Pierce family empire. The state investigator, Nathan, was incredibly thorough. Because my father had used my guest Wi-Fi to commit a felony, the State Financial Crimes Division secured warrants to seize his personal computers, his corporate servers, and his massive financial ledgers. They dug into his history. They found the boutique owner. They found 2 other independent contractors he had successfully blackmailed into signing over equity. The dominoes began to fall rapidly. The corporate logistics firm that my father had dedicated his entire life to, the firm he had tried to force me to die for, immediately placed him on unpaid administrative leave the moment the felony fraud charges were filed. 3 days later, to protect their own public relations, they terminated his contract entirely. He lost his massive salary. He lost his corporate prestige. He lost his golf club memberships. And then the ultimate betrayal happened. My mother, realizing that my father's massive legal bills and potential criminal restitution were going to severely drain their bank accounts, did exactly what a narcissist does when the ship starts sinking. She scrambled for the lifeboats. She filed for divorce. She hired her own aggressive lawyer and filed emergency motions to freeze the family trust and the inheritance accounts, claiming she had absolutely no knowledge of his criminal activities and wanted to protect her half of the assets. The woman who had stood in my coffee shop, demanding I hand over my hard-earned money to protect the family, was now actively destroying that exact same family to save her own designer wardrobe and her luxury lifestyle. Matthew, terrified of facing federal wire fraud charges as an accomplice, turned state's evidence. He fully cooperated with the prosecution, handing over every single text message, every email, and every instruction my father had ever given him regarding the fraudulent state filings. He threw the man who had bought him everything under the bus just to secure a plea deal that involved probation instead of prison time. The family that had cut me off, the family that had treated my absence like a funeral and moved on without me, completely imploded. They turned on each other the second the money and the power were threatened. Proved everything I had suspected 4 years ago. Their love was entirely conditional. It was based purely on control, submission, and financial leverage. Meanwhile, my life moved in the exact opposite direction. Riverside Coffee did not suffer from the public spectacle. In fact, it thrived. People talk. The college students who had witnessed the confrontation told their friends. Mr. Gray told the other regulars. Word spread around the neighborhood about the local coffee shop owner who stood his ground against a corporate bully, who secretly owned the entire commercial building, and who had his own extortionist father hauled away in handcuffs. We became a local legend. My sales doubled in the span of a single month. I had to hire 2 more baristas just to keep up with the morning rush. The community rallied around the shop in a way I had never anticipated. People respected the fact that I didn't back down. They respected the hustle. One crisp morning, about 3 months after the incident, I arrived at the shop at my usual 4:30 a.m. I unlocked the heavy glass door, turned on the warm pendant lights, and fired up the espresso machine. I stood behind the counter, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerators and the gentle hiss of the steam wand. I looked out the large front window. The street was empty, peaceful, and perfectly still. The silver Porsche was long gone. The heavy, suffocating shadow of my family was completely erased from my reality. I poured myself a simple cup of black coffee, leaned against the back counter, and just breathed. For 4 years, I had carried a heavy, invisible weight on my shoulders. I had spent countless nights staring at the ceiling of my cheap apartments, wondering if I had made the right choice. I wondered if the grueling manual labor, the financial panic, and the crushing loneliness were worth the price of my freedom. I used their rejection as a bitter fuel to keep myself moving forward, terrified that if I stopped running, the grief of losing my parents would finally catch up and destroy me. But standing there in the quiet warmth of my own successful business, inside a massive commercial building that bore my legal name on the deed, I realized the truth. The 4 years of silence they gave me was not a punishment. It was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. The silence gave me the space to figure out exactly who I was without their constant, toxic manipulation. The struggle taught me the true value of $1, the weight of a signed contract, and the unbreakable strength of my own 2 hands. While my father was busy building an empire of glass based on intimidation and fraud, I was quietly laying down a foundation of solid concrete based on hard work, legal compliance, and genuine human connection. I realized that the inheritance my father used to threaten me with, the trust funds, the real estate portfolios, the massive corporate salaries, was completely worthless. It was blood money. It came with a leash so tight it would have choked the life out of me. I would rather serve coffee to Mr. Gray every single morning for the rest of my life than spend one more day sitting in a corner office, miserable, trying to earn the approval of a man who viewed his own son as a financial asset to be leveraged. I learned that family is not defined by blood. Blood is a biological accident. Blood does not give anyone the right to abuse you, to manipulate you, or to demand a percentage of your peace. Family are the people who stand by you when your bank account is empty. Family is Chloe, hitting the panic button without a second of hesitation. Family is Wyatt, refusing to entertain a bully on the phone. Family is Mr. Gray, dropping a $20 bill in the tip jar after watching my entire world collide. You build your family through mutual respect, trust, and shared struggles. You do not inherit it. If there is one profound lesson I want you to take away from my story today, it is the absolute, undeniable power of documentation and boundaries. If you have a toxic person in your life, whether it is a parent, a sibling, or a boss, who constantly uses emotional guilt, financial threats, or sheer volume to control you, you must stop fighting them with emotion. Narcissists and bullies feed on your emotional reactions. They want you to yell. They want you to cry. They want you to feel crazy. Instead, fight them with cold, hard paper trails. Save the emails. Document the interactions. Secure your assets legally. Install the cameras. Build a fortress of compliance around your life that is so incredibly strong, they shatter their own teeth when they try to bite you. My father thought he could roll into my shop and overwhelm me with his presence. He didn't realize I had spent 4 years silently building a legal brick wall right in front of him. Your peace of mind is your greatest wealth. Do not let anyone, especially someone who shares your last name, convince you that you owe them your sanity as a family tax. You owe them absolutely nothing. This is where my story finds its conclusion. I am Joshua. I am 32 years old, and I am the sole owner of Riverside Coffee. I am free. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me through this long, intense journey. Sharing this was not easy, but I know there are people watching this right now who are dealing with their own toxic family members, wondering if the struggle to break free is actually worth it. I am standing here telling you that it is. I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this. What was the most impactful moment of this story for you? Have you ever had to draw a hard, legal boundary with a toxic family member? Please share your perspective in the comments below, or simply drop the word good, so I know that you found value and strength in the lessons I shared today. Your interactions help push this video to others who might desperately need to hear it. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.